For 7 years, she hid as Elena Reeves, a forgettable data analyst. But when United Flight 2847 systems failed at 38,000 feet, an F-22 pilot's voice shattered her secret. "Ma'am, is that you, Night Fury?" Now 289 passengers' lives depend on them. Before you start reading, comment below which country you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The coffee at Gate 47 tasted like every other airport coffee Elena had ever drunk, bitter, lukewarm, and forgettable. Just like her. That's exactly what she wanted. Elena Reeves sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, laptop open, pretending to review spreadsheets for Monday's meeting. Around her, travelers rushed past with their rolling suitcases and their important lives. Nobody looked at her twice. Nobody ever did. She'd perfected the art of being invisible over 7 years. Her outfit was carefully chosen: gray blazer from Target, white blouse, black slacks. Nothing expensive, nothing memorable. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No jewelry except small stud earrings. She looked like 1,000 other business travelers passing through Denver International Airport on this Tuesday afternoon. That was the point. Now boarding Flight 2847 to Washington Dulles, the gate agent announced. All zones, please have your boarding passes ready. Elena closed her laptop, gathered her things, and joined the line. The man in front of her was on his phone, arguing about stock prices. The woman behind her was eating a breakfast sandwich, even though it was 2 p.m. Nobody paid attention to the quiet woman in the gray blazer who moved through the line with practiced efficiency. Seat 23C. Middle seat. The worst seat on any plane, wedged between strangers. But Elena had specifically requested it when booking. Window seats attracted conversation, people wanted to look out, share observations about clouds and cities below. Aisle seats meant you had to stand up constantly for bathroom trips. But middle seats? Middle seats were invisible. People on either side would avoid eye contact, put in headphones, build walls of polite distance. Perfect. She settled into her seat as other passengers filed past. A businessman took 23B, already absorbed in his tablet. A college student claimed 23D, earbuds in before he even sat down. Neither acknowledged Elena beyond a brief nod. Exactly as she'd planned for 7 years. The flight attendant came by with the safety demonstration. Elena didn't watch. She'd seen it thousands of times before. More times than anyone on this plane could imagine. But that knowledge belonged to someone else, someone she'd left behind 7 years ago. Someone named Captain Alexandra Chen. Someone they'd called Night Fury. The memories always came during flights. Something about being in the air triggered associations she'd spent 7 years trying to suppress. She remembered her first time in an F-22 Raptor. The power, the precision, the feeling of controlling a machine that could do things most pilots only dreamed about. She remembered her instructor's voice: "Chen, you're a natural. Best raw talent I've seen in 15 years." She remembered earning her call sign during a training exercise that went perfectly, too perfectly. She'd executed a night operation with such precision that her commanding officer had joked, "You're like a ghost up there." A Night Fury. The name stuck. She remembered the missions. 17 high-value targets eliminated in contested airspace. 43 close air support missions where her weapons delivery saved soldiers on the ground. The legendary Operation Ghost Wing, where she single-handedly disabled an enemy air defense network in conditions that mission planners had called unsurvivable. She remembered coming home after each impossible mission, hearing the praise, accepting the medals, and wondering why she kept surviving when better pilots died on routine operations. She remembered Lieutenant Morrison, who took the missile meant for her aircraft. She remembered Captain Davis, who ran out of fuel 3 minutes short of the tanker because he'd burned extra helping her escape an ambush. She remembered Major Richards, her best friend, whose F-22 suffered mechanical failure returning from a mission where she'd once again defied death and accomplished the impossible. She remembered the breaking point, a routine training flight where she'd demonstrated a maneuver she'd perfected in combat. Suddenly she was back over Syria, back in the moment where Morrison died, back when she'd executed that exact move and lived while her wingman burned. She remembered landing on autopilot because her hands shook too badly to trust manual control. She remembered sitting in her kitchen that night, understanding with perfect clarity that Captain Alexandra, Night Fury, Chen couldn't exist anymore. That the weight of that identity was killing her more surely than enemy fire ever could. She remembered the paperwork. 6 months of the Air Force trying to convince her to stay. Medical leave offers. Desk assignments. Anything except letting their tactical genius walk away. She remembered the day her retirement was finalized. Honorable discharge. Impeccable service record. Recommendations that could have guaranteed her any defense contractor position or commercial pilot job she wanted. She remembered choosing none of those options. Instead, she'd moved to Denver. Enrolled in night classes for data analytics. Legally changed her name to Elena Reeves. Built a life so thoroughly ordinary that nobody would ever connect her to Night Fury. 7 years of working in corporate offices. 7 years of avoiding airports when possible, white-knuckling through necessary flights. 7 years of maintaining casual acquaintances but never close friendships. 7 years of being forgettable, unremarkable, invisible, and safe. Can I get you something to drink? The flight attendant's voice pulled Elena back to the present. Water, please, Elena said with the bland smile she'd perfected. The attendant served the businessman's coffee, handed Elena her water, and moved on without a second glance. Perfect. No recognition. No curiosity. No indication she was anything other than another mid-level employee on a routine business trip. Exactly as she'd engineered for 7 years. United Flight 2847 had been cruising smoothly for 90 minutes when the first sign of trouble appeared, a brief crackle over the cabin speakers that interrupted the soft music playing between announcements. Most passengers didn't notice. Elena noticed. 7 years of civilian life hadn't erased the combat pilot's reflexive attention to anything unusual in aircraft operations. But she deliberately forced herself not to care. Not to analyze. Not to fall into the tactical assessment mode that belonged to someone she no longer wanted to be. The captain's voice came through the intercom, professionally calm. Folks, this is Captain Mitchell from the flight deck. We're experiencing some minor technical difficulties with our navigation systems. Nothing to be concerned about, but we're adjusting our altitude and route slightly while we troubleshoot. Flight attendants, please return to your seats. Elena's hands tightened on the armrests, an involuntary response she immediately suppressed. Minor technical difficulties should be nothing to worry about on a Boeing 777. Multiple redundant systems should prevent any single failure from becoming serious. But something in the captain's tone, some subtle stress marker that only someone with thousands of hours of high-stakes flight experience would recognize, suggested this might be more significant than the announcement implied. She forced herself to relax. This wasn't her problem. She wasn't a pilot anymore. She was just a passenger who needed to trust the flight crew. The businessman glanced up. You fly much? Is this normal? I'm sure it's fine, Elena responded casually. They have backup systems for everything. He nodded and returned to his work. Elena stared at her seatback screen and fought every instinct screaming at her to analyze what could cause navigation problems across multiple redundant systems. 10 minutes passed. The cabin remained normal. Passengers reading, sleeping, watching movies. Then the aircraft shuddered. It was subtle, just a brief vibration that might be turbulence. Except Elena's muscle memory recognized it wasn't turbulence. Whatever caused that shudder involved the aircraft systems, not atmospheric conditions. Several passengers glanced up nervously. Elena kept her expression neutral while her combat pilot's brain catalogued the sensation against thousands of hours of flight experience. The captain's voice returned, and this time the professional calm sounded strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some additional technical issues. I need everyone to return to your seats immediately and fasten your seatbelts. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for potential emergency procedures." The cabin atmosphere transformed instantly. Passengers sat straighter. Conversations halted. Parents reached for children. Flight attendants moved through aisles with practiced efficiency, checking seatbelts and securing overhead bins. Elena felt her heart rate accelerate. Emergency procedures. Not minor difficulties anymore, something serious enough to prepare passengers for emergency protocols. Her hands gripped the armrests hard enough that her knuckles turned white. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to maintain the frightened civilian passenger persona. This wasn't her emergency. She wasn't responsible. She was just Elena Reeves, who knew nothing about aviation emergencies. The aircraft shuddered again, more pronounced this time, accompanied by a sound Elena's trained ear recognized as hydraulic system problems. Not catastrophic, but definitely degraded performance. Around her, passengers gasped. A child started crying. "What's happening?" the businessman asked, his face pale. "I don't know," Elena lied. Because Elena Reeves didn't know. Because admitting she recognized the specific sound patterns of hydraulic degradation would require explaining expertise she couldn't afford to reveal. But her combat pilot's mind was already running calculations. Hydraulic problems combined with navigation difficulties suggested either catastrophic coincidence or coordinated system failures. And if it wasn't coincidence, something was actively wrong with this aircraft. Something that might exceed what commercial crews were trained to handle. The captain's voice returned, urgency replacing calm. "This is Captain Mitchell. We are declaring an emergency. Please listen carefully to flight attendant instructions. We have experienced multiple system failures and are coordinating with air traffic control for emergency landing procedures. Please remain calm." The cabin erupted into barely controlled panic. Passengers cried out. Parents clutched children. People grabbed phones for desperate final messages. Elena sat frozen, her carefully maintained civilian persona cracking. She understood exactly how serious multiple system failures were. How limited commercial crew training was for cascading emergencies. How desperately these 289 people needed help the current crew might not be able to provide. But providing that help meant revealing herself. Stepping forward with expertise Elena Reeves shouldn't possess. Destroying 7 years of anonymity to become Night Fury again, even temporarily. She sat paralyzed between duty demanding she help and self-preservation screaming at her to stay hidden. Between 289 lives and her own psychological survival. The aircraft dropped suddenly. Not catastrophic failure, but definitely loss of altitude control. Oxygen masks deployed from overhead compartments, dangling like accusatory fingers pointing at her paralysis. Elena's hands moved automatically, securing her mask through procedures she'd practiced thousands of times. She helped the businessman fumble his into place, her movement steady despite internal crisis. That's when the radio transmission cut through the cabin speakers, "Must be patched from the cockpit, must be serious enough that the captain wanted passengers to hear military coordination." A voice came through with the clipped professional tone of fighter pilot communications, United 2847, "This is Raptor 1 of the 27th Fighter Squadron, United States Air Force. We have been scrambled to provide tactical support for your emergency. Please transmit your full situation report. F-22 Raptors. The 27th Fighter Squadron." Elena's hands stopped shaking as something cold and sharp settled in her chest. She knew that squadron. She'd trained pilots in that squadron during her final assignment at Nellis Air Force Base. Those pilots had learned tactical aviation from Night Fury. The captain responded, stressed and desperate. Raptor 1, United 2847. We have multiple cascading system failures, navigation, hydraulics, flight control degradation. We're losing altitude control. We have 289 souls on board and need immediate assistance. United 2847, copy all. We're coordinating with Edwards Air Force Base for emergency landing. Stand by for. The pilot's voice cut off abruptly. Silence stretched for several seconds before he returned, his professional tone now carrying shocked disbelief. United 2847, we have established video link with your cabin cameras for tactical assessment. I need to confirm something. Is there a passenger aboard your flight, female, approximately 5'6", sitting in seat 23C? Elena's heart stopped. Around her, passengers looked confused. But Elena understood with sick certainty what was happening. The F-22 pilot was looking at cabin camera feeds. Seeing her face despite 7 years of anonymity. Recognizing features that training photos had burned into his memory. She closed her eyes. 7 years of careful invisibility crumbling in real time. The captain's voice came back, confused. Raptor 1, affirmative. We have a female passenger in seat 23C. Why is this relevant? The F-22 pilot's voice returned with unmistakable recognition, profound shock, and desperate hope. Ma'am, is that you, Night Fury? The cabin fell into absolute silence. Every passenger who could hear froze. Flight attendants stopped mid-motion. The panic was momentarily suspended by pure confusion about what they'd just heard. The captain's voice, Raptor 1, please clarify. Who are you addressing? But Elena couldn't hear over the roaring in her ears. Over the sound of her carefully constructed world collapsing. Over 7 years of peace and anonymity shattering because someone had said those 2 words, Night Fury, and connected them to her. The businessman stared at her. What did he say? Night Fury. Is he talking to you? She couldn't respond. Couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. 7 years of running. 7 years of hiding. All destroyed by a combat pilot recognizing the instructor who taught him tactical aviation. The F-22 pilot continued, his voice carrying unmistakable reverence and urgent desperation. Ma'am, this is Captain James Rodriguez, call sign Viper 23. I flew under your command at Nellis Air Force Base, 27th Fighter Squadron, 2017 through 2018. You taught me advanced tactical aviation. Ma'am, I recognize you. I know that face. These people need you. They need Night Fury's expertise. Please, ma'am. We need you. Around Elena, passengers began understanding that something extraordinary was happening. That military fighter pilots weren't just providing escort, they were addressing someone aboard this aircraft with profound respect that suggested legendary status. They turned to look at her. Confusion transforming into curiosity. Elena opened her eyes slowly, feeling the crushing weight of inevitability. The terrible acceptance that she could no longer hide. That duty was demanding she reclaim the identity she'd spent 7 years escaping. The captain's voice returned with dawning understanding and desperate hope. Raptor 1, are you telling me I have a military pilot aboard my aircraft? Someone who can help coordinate this emergency. Rodriguez responded immediately. Captain, if that's who I think it is, you have more than just a military pilot. You have one of the most accomplished tactical aviators in Air Force history. You have the pilot who pioneered half the crisis management procedures we use today. You have Night Fury, sir. And if she's willing to help, she can coordinate emergency management that will save everyone aboard your aircraft. The captain didn't hesitate. His voice came through with desperate authority, Night Fury, this is Captain Mitchell. If you're aboard my aircraft, I am requesting your immediate assistance in the cockpit. We are beyond our training parameters. Please, ma'am. Help us. Elena unbuckled her seatbelt with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. She stood slowly, and her entire demeanor transformed. The rounded shoulders straightened into military bearing. The blank expression sharpened into tactical focus. The forgettable civilian persona dissolved to reveal something harder and more dangerous beneath. The businessmen stumbled back, eyes wide at the transformation. Other passengers stared as she moved into the aisle. This woman they'd ignored for hours suddenly radiated command presence that made it physically difficult to look away. A flight attendant moved to intercept her. "Ma'am, I need you to return to your seat." The woman who used to be Captain Alexandra Chen and had spent 7 years being Elena Reeves fixed the attendant with eyes that had seen combat operations most people couldn't imagine. "The captain requested my assistance. I'm a former Air Force combat pilot." "Step aside." The attendant stepped aside. Not because of the words, but because of something in the tone. Something that communicated this was not someone to obstruct when lives hung in the balance. Other passengers watched in stunned silence as this unremarkable woman moved through the cabin with purpose that suggested everything they thought they knew about her was elaborate deception. She reached the cockpit door and knocked with a specific pattern: 3 sharp raps, pause, 2 raps. Military identification code from her era. The door opened immediately. She entered without waiting for invitation. The cockpit was controlled chaos. Captain Mitchell wrestling with unresponsive controls. The first officer coordinating desperately with air traffic control. Warning lights illuminating the panel like deadly Christmas decorations. Mitchell glanced back, his face showing desperate hope mixed with uncertainty. She moved between the pilot seats, her eyes scanning the instrument panel with instant comprehensive assessment. Her tactical mind processed failure modes and degraded systems with automatic efficiency. "Captain Mitchell," she said, her voice carrying tactical calm that cut through the chaos. "I'm establishing communication with the F-22 formation. I need you to focus on maintaining what altitude control you still have while I coordinate crisis management." Mitchell nodded without questioning. He was beyond the point where pride mattered. He handed her a headset, making room, accepting her presence with desperate gratitude. She settled the headset over her ears, keyed the transmit button, and spoke with a voice that belonged to someone she hadn't been in 7 years. "Raptor 1, this is Night Fury. I copy your situation. Transmit full tactical picture and I'll coordinate crisis management from the flight deck." The response was immediate. Rodriguez's voice carried barely controlled emotion. "Night Fury, Raptor 1. Ma'am, it's actually you. We thought after you disappeared. Ma'am, it's an honor." "Save the reunion, Captain," she cut him off, not unkindly, but with tactical focus that allowed no sentiment when lives hung in the balance. "Right now I need tactical assessment. What's your formation strength and what support can you provide?" "Night Fury, for F-22's information. Full tactical capability. We have Edwards Air Force Base cleared for emergency landing. Ground support standing by. But ma'am, the 777 systems are cascading failure. This doesn't look like mechanical failure. This looks like coordinated sabotage or external interference." "Electronic warfare," she finished, because she'd already reached that conclusion. Cascading system degradation across multiple independent backups didn't happen naturally. "Any radar contacts suggesting hostile aircraft or electronic warfare assets in the area?" "Negative on radar contacts, ma'am. But we're detecting unusual electromagnetic interference patterns consistent with advanced jamming systems. Someone might be targeting this aircraft with ground-based or airborne EW capabilities we're not detecting on conventional radar." Mitchell turned to stare at her, shock on his face. "Are you saying someone is attacking my aircraft?" She met his eyes with calm that came from flying missions where hostile fire was expected. "Captain, focus on flying what's left of your aircraft. I'll handle the tactical situation. First officer, transmit passenger manifest to military command immediately. If this is deliberate targeting, there's a reason someone wants this specific flight disabled. The first officer moved to comply without questioning. She keyed the radio back to Rodriguez. Raptor 1, I need tactical assessment of electromagnetic interference. Can you localize the source? Night Fury, stand by for EW analysis. While she waited, she analyzed the flight systems. The hydraulic systems were failing but not completely dead, suggesting electronic interference rather than physical damage. Navigation systems receiving corrupted data, GPS jamming rather than equipment failure. Flight controls degraded but responsive, command signal interference rather than mechanical breakdown. Everything pointed to sophisticated electronic warfare attack. Which meant someone on the passenger manifest was significant enough to warrant this level of resource commitment. Captain Mitchell, she said with tactical calm, maintain heading toward Edwards as long as possible. The jamming is likely designed to force us off course. If we can reach Edwards, we have ground support that can counter electronic warfare. And if we can't maintain heading? Mitchell asked, voice tight with stress. Then I coordinate emergency landing using tactical procedures that commercial aviation doesn't teach. Captain, I've landed damaged aircraft in contested airspace under fire from hostile forces. I can land your 777 with degraded systems if necessary. Mitchell's hands tightened on controls. Who the hell are you? Someone who retired 7 years ago, she answered quietly. Someone who doesn't fly anymore because the cost got too high. Someone who is extremely unhappy to be back in a cockpit. But someone who will save your passengers, Captain. Because that's what I do. Rodriguez's voice returned, urgent, Night Fury, we have EW source localized. Ground-based jamming system approximately 40 miles northeast of your position. Advanced Russian pattern equipment, military grade. Ma'am, someone deployed serious assets to bring this aircraft down. Can you suppress it? Negative, ma'am. System is in populated area. We cannot engage without risking civilian casualties. The aircraft shuddered violently. More warning alarms screamed across the instrument panel. The hydraulics finally gave up completely, leaving Mitchell with flight controls that responded sluggishly through backup electrical systems never designed to manage an aircraft this size. Night Fury, Rodriguez's voice carried barely controlled urgency, United 2847's altitude is degrading rapidly. You need to execute emergency descent immediately before you lose what control authority you still have. She was already moving. Her hands reaching for controls with muscle memory 7 years hadn't erased. Captain Mitchell, initiate emergency descent. First Officer, coordinate with air traffic control. Raptor 1, I need tactical escort through descent profile and ground approach vectors. Night Fury, Raptor formation is with you. We'll provide tactical coordination and clear your approach corridor. Ma'am, whatever you're planning, we trust your expertise. Just like we did when you trained us. She felt something crack in her chest at those words. Some fragment of the psychological armor she'd built over 7 years. But she couldn't afford to process that emotion now. Beginning emergency descent, Mitchell announced, his hands implementing procedures that represented controlled catastrophe. The aircraft tilted forward. The nose dropping with stomach-lurching suddenness. Through the cockpit windows, the ground began rising with threatening speed. She monitored descent parameters, her tactical mind calculating angles and velocities with automatic precision. She called corrections to Mitchell when his inputs drifted outside optimal parameters. Passing 20,000 feet, the first officer called out. Edwards Air Force Base is 70 miles ahead, but at current descent rate will be below safe cruising altitude in 6 minutes. Night Fury, we have ground forces moving to suppress the jamming system, Rodriguez transmitted. But they need 12 minutes to reach position. Ma'am, can you keep that aircraft controllable for 12 more minutes? She looked at the instrument panel. At the cascading warnings. At backup controls operating beyond design parameters. She ran calculations that told her what she already knew. This aircraft had maybe 8 minutes of controlled flight left before landing became crash. They wouldn't make Edwards. Negative, Raptor 1. We don't have 12 minutes. We have 8 at most before flight control degradation reaches catastrophic. I need alternate landing options within 5 minutes of current position. Silence while everyone processed that timeline. Night Fury, Rodriguez's voice returned tight with stress. There's a regional airport 40 miles south of your position. Single runway, 8,000 feet. No emergency services beyond basic fire equipment. Ma'am, it's not rated for aircraft this size. Landing a 777 there is. What Night Fury specialized in, she finished calmly. Captain Rodriguez, I've landed damaged F-22s on runways half that length with no emergency services and hostile fire incoming. I can land this commercial aircraft on 8,000 feet of concrete if the captain trusts me. Mitchell turned to look at her, his eyes showing naked fear mixed with desperate hope. You can really do this? Save my passengers? Captain, I once landed an F-22 with no hydraulics, degraded flight controls, and one engine on a highway in Syria while taking ground fire. Your 777 has better glide characteristics. Yes, sir. I can save your passengers. But I need you to trust me completely and follow my instructions exactly. Mitchell nodded without hesitation. The aircraft is yours, ma'am. Tell me what you need. The next 6 minutes were compressed intensity beyond anything commercial aviation normally experienced. Captain Mitchell following her instructions with precision. The first officer coordinating with ground services. Her voice maintaining steady tactical calm that pretended they were executing routine procedures rather than attempting a landing that pushed beyond design parameters of both aircraft and runway. She walked Mitchell through emergency procedures that didn't exist in commercial aviation handbooks. Techniques she developed during combat operations where survival meant innovation. She had him configure the aircraft for maximum drag to burn off excess speed without losing control. Coordinated with Rodriguez's F-22s to provide visual confirmation of landing gear deployment since their indicators might be corrupted. Talked Mitchell through an approach angle steeper than commercial standards but necessary given their abbreviated runway. United 2847, this is Regional Airport Tower. A new voice joined the radio traffic, young and clearly terrified. We have emergency vehicles positioning. Ma'am, I need to inform you that our runway is not certified for aircraft your size. Landing loads might exceed. Tower, this is Night Fury coordinating emergency landing, she cut in with tactical authority. Your runway will hold. Clear the approach corridor and have your emergency services ready for possible runway overrun. But we're landing on your runway regardless of certification. Acknowledge. Acknowledged, Night Fury. Runway is cleared. Ma'am, good luck. Luck is what civilians need, she responded. I have training. Captain Mitchell, we're beginning final approach. Follow my instructions exactly and ignore what feels wrong. Everything about this landing violates commercial standards, but commercial standards weren't designed for tactical crisis management. Trust the procedures. I trust you, Mitchell said simply. The regional airport rose through the windscreen. Single ribbon of concrete stretching across scrubland that looked impossibly short for an aircraft this size. Emergency vehicles clustered at the approach end like nervous spectators. No margin for error. She coordinated with Rodriguez's formation as they maintained escort. She walked Mitchell through final approach configuration. Had him dump additional speed through aggressive flare that commercial pilots would never attempt. 300 feet, Rodriguez called, his F-22 maintaining parallel position. 200 feet. Approach looks good, Night Fury. 100. 50. Ma'am, this is going to work. Touchdown now, she commanded. Main gear contact. Hold the nose up. Maximum aerodynamic braking until you feel main gear grip. Then nose gear down and full braking authority. Do not try to make this gentle. We need maximum deceleration immediately. The Boeing 777 slammed onto the runway with impact that rattled teeth and screamed through the airframe. Main landing gear absorbing forces they weren't designed for. Tires smoking immediately as Mitchell implemented full braking. Through the windscreen, the end of runway approached with terrifying speed. Brakes holding, Mitchell grunted through clenched teeth. Deceleration is good. 4,000 feet remaining. 3,000. We're going to make it. 2,000. 1,000. The aircraft shuddered to complete stop with maybe 200 feet of runway remaining. Brakes smoking like battlefield aftermath. The entire airframe groaning from abuse. But completely, impossibly stopped and intact with all 289 passengers alive. Emergency vehicles surrounded them immediately. Fire crews spraying foam on overheated brakes. Ground personnel positioning stairs. Mitchell sat back in his seat, his hands shaking. You saved us. That landing was impossible. No commercial pilot could have done what you just did. No commercial pilot had to train for combat landing under fire, she responded, exhaustion in her voice. Captain, you did excellent work. Your passengers survived because you trusted expertise you didn't understand. The first officer turned to look at her. Ma'am, who are you? I mean, I know they called you Night Fury, but what does that mean? It means, Mitchell said quietly, that she's not just a military pilot. She's a legend. Someone whose expertise rewrote tactical aviation doctrine. Someone who disappeared 7 years ago and has been hiding as a civilian passenger ever since. He paused. Why? She didn't answer. Because explaining required confronting trauma she wasn't ready to process. Instead, she removed the headset and turned toward the cockpit door. I need to check on the passengers. But when she opened the door and stepped into the cabin, she found 289 passengers on their feet, giving her thunderous standing ovation. Their faces showing relief and gratitude and shocked awe. Flight attendants were crying. Parents clutching children. And every face showed the same question, who is she? The businessmen pushed forward through the crowd. You saved us all. You were sitting right there next to me, and I had no idea. When you said you worked in data analysis, I actually believed you were a boring corporate employee. You're actually some kind of legendary military pilot. Who are you really? She forced a smile. I'm someone who used to fly. Someone who doesn't anymore. Someone who helped today because 289 lives required it. But who really wishes she hadn't been recognized. The cabin door opened. Rodriguez and his 3 wingmen boarded, still in flight suits. Rodriguez approached and rendered perfect military salute. Ma'am, permission to speak. She returned the salute automatically. The gesture felt both natural and devastating. Granted, Captain. Ma'am, when you disappeared 7 years ago, it devastated the entire tactical aviation community. You were the instructor who taught half the combat pilots currently flying F-22s. You pioneered crisis management procedures that have saved countless lives. You were, he paused, searching for words, you were Night Fury, ma'am. The legend. And then suddenly you were gone. We thought maybe you died. And now you're here and you just saved 289 lives using expertise we thought was lost forever. His voice cracked slightly. Ma'am, why did you leave? Why did you hide? She met his eyes and saw genuine hurt beneath the respect. Captain Rodriguez, I left because I needed to. I left because 7 years ago, I reached a point where I couldn't be Night Fury anymore. I left because sometimes extraordinary capabilities come packaged with extraordinary costs. And eventually those costs exceed what any person should be expected to bear. She paused. I retired honorably. I earned that retirement through service that cost me more than medals measure. And I spent 7 years building a civilian life where nobody expected me to be Night Fury. Where I could exist as an ordinary person rather than a legend. But ma'am, you're not ordinary, Rodriguez protested. You're exceptional. You just proved your capabilities are still intact. The Air Force needs you. We need you. And that training, she said, her voice harder than intended, nearly destroyed me, Captain. I did not leave the Air Force lightly. I did not spend 7 years hiding because I was bored. I left because Night Fury was killing me. Because the psychological burden of being the pilot who could do the impossible became indistinguishable from being the pilot who survived while others died. Because survivors' guilt and combat trauma and legendary status combined into something that left me unable to function. The cabin fell silent. Passengers listening to a confession that explained what legendary status really costs. Rodriguez's face showed dawning understanding mixed with horror. Ma'am, I didn't realize. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I recognized you. I'm sorry I destroyed your anonymity. I'm sorry I forced you to be Night Fury again. She managed a smile that might actually reach her eyes. Captain, you saved these people's lives by recognizing me. Yes, you destroyed 7 years of anonymity. Yes, I'm devastated. But you gave these passengers a chance at survival. You made the tactically correct decision. Be angry at the situation, not at yourself. Rodriguez nodded slowly. Ma'am, what happens now? With your identity exposed, with media inevitably discovering that legendary pilot just saved a commercial flight. Ma'am, you can't hide anymore. She knew he was right. Her 7 years of peace ended the moment he said, Night Fury, over open radio channels. Military personnel would brief this up the chain of command. Media would discover the legendary pilot's return. Her civilian identity was permanently compromised. What happens now, she said quietly, is that I accept the consequences of being recognized. I deal with the inevitable media attention. I confront the identity I tried to escape. And I figure out whether I can reclaim some version of it that doesn't destroy me psychologically. She paused. And I decide whether saving 289 lives today means I have a moral obligation to return to service. To teach tactical aviation again. To be Night Fury for pilots who need the expertise I spent 7 years suppressing. Ma'am, you don't have to decide that right now, Rodriguez said gently. You don't have to commit to anything. You saved these people. That's enough. Whatever you decide about your future, you've already proven that Night Fury's capabilities were never lost. They were just dormant. One of Rodriguez's wingmen approached, a younger pilot whose face showed starstruck awe. Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Sarah Chin. No relation, she added quickly. I just wanted to say that I read your tactical aviation papers at the Air Force Academy. Your combat mission analyses are required reading for advanced flight training. You're the reason I applied for the fighter pilot program. The woman who used to be Captain Alexandra Chen and spent 7 years being Elena Reeves looked at this young pilot whose career was shaped by tactical doctrine she developed. She felt something crack deeper in her chest. This is what Night Fury really meant. Not just her achievements, but the legacy that influenced an entire generation of pilots. Not just her combat record, but the training and teaching that multiplied her expertise across dozens of aviators. And maybe that legacy was worth more than her desperate need for anonymity. Lieutenant Chen, she said carefully, the papers you read were written by someone at the peak of her career. Someone who hadn't yet confronted the full psychological cost of those operations. They're accurate from a tactical perspective, but they don't capture the human price. If you're going to build your career on my doctrine, I need you to understand that tactical brilliance isn't free. It costs in ways medals don't measure. The young lieutenant nodded seriously. Ma'am, I understand. My instructors made sure we knew that Night Fury didn't just disappear. She retired early because the psychological burden became unsustainable. They taught us your tactical expertise alongside warnings about combat trauma. Ma'am, you didn't just teach us how to fly. You taught us that even the best pilots have to acknowledge their human limitations. Something shifted in her chest at those words. Some fragment of guilt and shame beginning to crack. Maybe retiring wasn't weakness. Maybe choosing psychological survival over continued service wasn't abandoning duty. Maybe Night Fury taught important lessons through her retirement as well as through her combat achievements. Maybe she didn't have to be ashamed of the 7 years she spent hiding. Maybe those 7 years were necessary healing time. Maybe Elena Reeves wasn't elaborate deception, but legitimate attempt at recovery. And maybe being recognized today, as devastating as it felt, might actually be an opportunity. Opportunity to reclaim Night Fury on her own terms. Opportunity to teach tactical aviation again, but with explicit acknowledgement of psychological costs. Opportunity to be the legendary pilot whose expertise saves lives while also being the traumatized veteran whose recovery teaches important lessons. She looked around the cabin at the passengers who survived because Night Fury returned. At Rodriguez and his formation who flew escort using tactics she taught them. At Lieutenant Chen whose career was shaped by doctrine she developed. She understood with clarity that felt simultaneously devastating and liberating that she couldn't hide from this identity anymore. Couldn't pretend Elena Reeves was sufficient when Night Fury represented capabilities and knowledge that others desperately needed. Her 7 years of peace were over. But maybe that was acceptable if those 7 years provided healing that allowed her to be Night Fury again without the cost destroying her. Captain Rodriguez, she said quietly, I'm going to need time to process today's events and decide what comes next. But I want you to know that being recognized by someone I trained, being addressed as Night Fury by pilots who remember my teaching, being needed for expertise I thought I'd never use again, it's complicated. It's devastating and affirming and terrifying all at once. She paused. I spent 7 years convinced that walking away was necessary for my survival. Today proved that maybe I was right to walk away when I did. But it also proved that the expertise I tried to bury is still valuable. Still needed. Ma'am, whatever you decide, the tactical aviation community will respect it, Rodriguez responded. If you choose to return to teaching or consulting, we would be honored. If you choose to maintain civilian life as much as possible, we'll defend your privacy. Night Fury saved enough lives and taught enough pilots that nobody has the right to demand more. She nodded, grateful for his understanding. The passengers had mostly disembarked. Emergency personnel confirming everyone survived without serious injury. Through the windows, she could see media vehicles gathering at the airport perimeter. Cameras and reporters who would want every detail about the legendary pilot who emerged from 7 years of hiding. The attention she'd spent 7 years avoiding was about to become unavoidable. The anonymity she'd carefully constructed was permanently destroyed. Elena Reeves existed for 7 years, but she couldn't exist anymore. But maybe that wasn't entirely tragic. Maybe reclaiming Night Fury on her own terms, with psychological boundaries she'd learned to maintain, with explicit acknowledgement of trauma and limitations, might be healthier than continuing to hide. Maybe the path forward wasn't choosing between Elena Reeves and Night Fury. Maybe it was integrating both identities into someone who acknowledged tactical genius while also acknowledging human vulnerability. She walked toward the cabin door where emergency stairs waited. Her hands shook slightly. Her breath coming short because stepping through this door meant stepping back into public identity she'd avoided for 7 years. Rodriguez appeared beside her. Ma'am, I can run interference with media if you want. My formation can provide escort. You don't have to face them alone. She managed a smile. Thank you, Captain. But I think I need to face this directly rather than hiding behind military escort. I spent 7 years hiding. Maybe it's time to stop hiding and start acknowledging what Night Fury represents, the good and the bad, the achievements and the trauma. She stepped through the door and down the emergency stairs. Media cameras turned toward her immediately. Reporters shouting questions. Flash bulbs creating artificial lightning. But she straightened her spine with military bearings she hadn't used in 7 years. Met the cameras with direct gaze that acknowledged their attention. Her 7 years of peace were over. Her carefully constructed anonymity was destroyed. But 289 people were alive because she'd emerged from hiding. Rodriguez and his formation flew escort using tactics she taught them. Lieutenant Chen and countless other pilots built careers on doctrine she developed. And maybe that legacy, painful and complicated as it was, meant Night Fury was an identity worth reclaiming. She didn't know what came next. Didn't know if she'd return to teaching tactical aviation or maintain a civilian career or find some hybrid path. But she knew that as of today, she couldn't hide anymore. As of today, Night Fury was public knowledge. As of today, she had to confront the legendary identity she'd spent 7 years escaping and decide whether she could carry it without the burden destroying her. The first reporter reached her. "Ma'am, is it true that you're the legendary Night Fury? That you've been in hiding for 7 years? That you just saved 289 lives using tactical expertise from your military career?" She took a deep breath and began answering questions that would define her public identity going forward. No longer Elena Reeves, the invisible data analyst. No longer Captain Alexandra Chen, the traumatized retiree. But something new and undefined. The woman who was Night Fury, who walked away when the cost became too high, who returned when duty demanded it, and who now must figure out whether legendary status is curse or calling or complicated combination of both. Her 7 years of anonymity were over. But maybe they'd provided the healing she needed to face Night Fury again. Maybe hiding was necessary preparation for reclaiming. Maybe running was required before she could return. And maybe the pilot who said, "Ma'am, is that you, Night Fury," didn't just destroy her peace. Maybe he gave her permission to stop hiding from who she really is and start building a life that acknowledges both her extraordinary capabilities and her very human limitations. The story of Night Fury wasn't over. It was just entering a new chapter. One she never wanted but might actually need. One she tried desperately to avoid but might ultimately survive. She faced the cameras, acknowledged the questions, and accepted that whatever came next, Elena Reeves and Captain Alexandra Chen and Night Fury were all part of the same complicated identity. And maybe that integration, painful as it was, represented the path forward. Her 7 years of peace were over. But maybe something better was beginning. Something honest. Something integrated. Something that acknowledged that legends are human and humans are fallible. And sometimes the bravest thing a legendary pilot can do is admit vulnerability while still offering the extraordinary capabilities that save lives. Night Fury had returned. Not because she wanted to. Not because she was ready. But because 289 lives needed her. And maybe that need was enough to justify reclaiming the identity she'd spent 7 years trying to escape.